today's video, we're going to continue on with part 2 where we explain offshore bank account opening. Our first video covered the basics that everyone should be aware of when opening offshore accounts, including what is an offshore account, how you can benefit from offshore banking, and what you cannot do with an offshore account. We also dispelled a few rumors about offshore banking and taxes as well. In this video, we're going to talk about offshore banking countries, where you should be considering opening accounts, the perks, and of course some of the challenges as well. But before we get started, make sure you hit the subscribe button and the notification bell so you get alerted every time we post new non-resident banking opportunities. Now, to help you get started with offshore bank account opening, we have a free non-resident banking starter guide. It's designed to help non-resident and foreigners open bank accounts. So don't forget to download your copy using the link in the description below. So where can you open an offshore account? An offshore account is simply any bank account outside of your home country. That said, there are a handful of jurisdictions that are better known for banking than others. These are commonly referred to as offshore financial centers. Not surprisingly, when most people think of opening an offshore account, they envision banking in these countries. In just a moment, I'll share some of these countries, their pros and cons, the types of clients who bank there, and the minimum deposit requirements expected when opening accounts there. First off, open an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Offshore account type, private banking. Minimum deposit, $50,000 US to $100,000 US. Opening difficulty, high. Remote opening, possible. Suitable clients include non-residents, trusts, investment funds, offshore companies, and wealth management. Cayman Islands is one of the most important jurisdictions in the international banking world. It's the world's 5th largest financial center, home to 75% of all the world's hedge funds, and has $674 billion with a B, US on deposit. In general, forming companies, setting up investment funds, and even acquiring residency in the Cayman Islands is an administrative process that most people can navigate, as long as they think they can afford the fees. For that reason, you might think that opening an offshore account would be an easy process. But that's not exactly true, and to open here successfully, there are hurdles that you're going to need to overcome. For example, Cayman requires you to demonstrate real economic ties to the island. Simply being a frequent visitor won't work. Also, Cayman is a more expensive jurisdiction, meaning that you'll need to deposit higher amounts to get the attention of bankers. This is especially true when trying to open accounts at the private banking level. That said, it is possible to acquire the necessary ties, and if you know which banks and bankers to approach, you can open accounts. Number 2, opening an offshore account in the Isle of Man. The offshore account type, retail or private banking. The minimum deposit you can expect to make is between $5,000 US and $100,000 US. The opening difficulty is moderate. Remote opening is possible. And the suitable clients include non-resident, expats, and wealth management. Opening an offshore account in the Isle of Man is an under-the-radar banking alternative. It's especially attractive for anyone just getting started with offshore banking and those interested in opening an offshore account with a lower initial deposit. That said, there are some important caveats when applying for an offshore account here, especially when selecting banks and during the application stage. The key is understanding your client profile, associated risk factors, and knowing which banks will realistically accept you as a client. Otherwise, you end up wasting time, money, and energy applying to banks where you have little to no chance of being approved. Number 3, open an offshore account in Liechtenstein. The offshore account type, private banking. Minimum deposit is usually anywhere from $250,000 US to $3 million US. Opening difficulty is high. Remote opening is possible. And the suitable clients include non-residents seeking wealth management. Liechtenstein is a private banking jurisdiction. In other words, if you're considering opening an offshore account here, it should be for private banking and wealth management purposes. If that's you, Liechtenstein could be an excellent choice. Non-residents, foreign companies, trusts, and foundations are all welcome here, assuming they are looking for private banking. Of course, opening requirements vary from bank to bank, so knowing what you're up against and what the nuances are before applying is key. Additionally, when applying for an offshore account in Liechtenstein, analyze the fees carefully. Fees in Liechtenstein can be significantly higher than other countries and have the potential to offset the benefits that you'd otherwise derive from the offshore account. Number 4, opening an offshore account in Singapore. Offshore account type, personal, business, and private banking. Minimum deposit is anywhere from $100,000 US to $250,000. The opening difficulty is high. Remote opening is possible. And the suitable clients are non-residents with domestic and foreign companies and wealth management. Singapore is an excellent jurisdiction to open an offshore account, but opening an offshore account here is a challenge. The reason for the high degree of account opening difficulty is simple. The banks have plenty of clients to choose from. As the Switzerland of Asia, Singapore attracts investors, businesses, and wealthy clients from across the region, and international demand has been surging over the last 10 years. Singapore banks are rock solid. There has never been a failure. And the nation's regulators have a reputation for uncompromising standards in some of the most well-capitalized banks on the planet. So, naturally, Singapore is a popular destination for anyone looking to open an offshore account. But you must know which banks and even bankers to approach and what their account opening quirks and preferences are, like your client profile, required documents, financial criteria, ties, etc., before you apply. Otherwise, you'll be quickly denied. Number 5, open an offshore account in Switzerland. Offshore account type, private banking. Minimum deposit anywhere from $500,000 to $3 million US. Opening difficulty is medium. Remote opening is possible. And suitable client lists include non-residents and wealth management. Opening an offshore account in Switzerland is still the creme de la creme. And it's no surprise, Swiss banking has been idolized, demonized, and immortalized by Hollywood, the media, and history books. So for many, an offshore account here is kind of like a rite of passage. In fact, Switzerland holds roughly $6.5 trillion in assets, around 25% of total cross-border assets globally. Not too bad. But now that the days of banking secrecy are over, Swiss bankers are under pressure to deliver value and returns to keep offshore account holders happy. To do so, Swiss banks offer sophisticated financial services, specialty investments, and lending solutions. Not surprisingly, Swiss banks cater to clients interested in these services. Those looking to hold cash, who don't plan to invest or use any bank services, should look elsewhere. When it comes to opening an offshore account, it's possible to do so with most major Swiss private banks, if you can deposit between $500,000 US and $3 million. But remember, requirements, services, and banker quality vary dramatically, so bank and banker selection is critical. You'll also still need to go through compliance, pass due diligence, and carefully negotiate fees. Number 6, open an offshore account in Monaco. Offshore account type, private banking. Minimum deposits anywhere from $500,000 US to $3 million. Opening difficulty is medium. Remote opening is possible. And suitable clients include non-residents, prospective residents, and wealth management. Monaco is a specialty banking hub that caters primarily to those with interest in the Principality or along the French Riviera. For this reason, many individuals opening an offshore account in Monaco either have residency, plan to get residency, or plan to acquire assets in the region. Now, similar to many of the other jurisdictions on this list, Monaco focuses on private banking. Not surprisingly, banks here cater to high net worth individuals and ultra high net worth individuals. For this reason, the services on offer typically revolve around luxury assets, real estate, marine and aircraft investments, and other specialty lending products. Of course, if you can meet the deposit requirements, it's also possible to open an offshore account in Monaco as a non-resident, even if you don't plan on ever actually acquiring residency or property. However, to do so typically requires more than $500,000 US. If you approach the right banks, have the right contacts, and can meet the requirements, it's also possible to open an offshore account remotely and additional accounts for offshore companies and more exotic structures. Number 7, open an offshore account in Panama. Offshore account type, personal, business, and private banking. Minimum deposit anywhere from $10,000 US to $100,000 US. The opening difficulty is high. Remote opening is possible. And suitable clients include non-residents, residents, domestic and foreign companies, and wealth management. Opening an offshore account in Panama is one way to enter the world of offshore banking with a smaller deposit. Like some banks in the Isle of Man, Panama accepts lower deposit amounts, will consider remote opening, and has English-speaking bankers. But unlike most jurisdictions, Panama also benefits from the fact that the entire economy is based on the US dollar. which can protect deposits from currency fluctuations as well as domestic or regional economic concerns. More importantly, Panama doesn't have deposit insurance. Not all Panamanian banks are great. Service can be spotty, and not all bankers speak English. So, bank and banker selection is crucial. For this reason, we suggest focusing on Panamanian banks with strong balance sheets, English-speaking staff, and experienced bankers. Risks when opening an offshore account. Opening an offshore account is not without risks. So, we're going to explore some of the key risks to be aware of when opening an account abroad. Number 1, country-related risks. Depending on where you decide to open an offshore account, there might be some country-specific risks that could impact your deposits. For example, these risks come in the form of political unrest, economic downturns, legislative changes, exchange controls, currency fluctuations, or even military conflicts. So, knowing what the risks are, how they can potentially impact your account, and how to protect yourself is important. To mitigate such risks, look to open an offshore account in a relatively stable jurisdiction with a history of political and economic stability and a strong rule of law. Number 2, bank-related risks. When it comes to offshore accounts, some of the biggest risks that account holders are exposed to come from the banks themselves. Bank risks primarily include financial risks, operating risks, and compliance shortcomings, though all of these can be broken down into many subcategories. Knowing how financially stable the bank is, where a bank is vulnerable or lacking, and how as a potential client you could be negatively impacted is critical. Number 3, financial risks. When considering an offshore account, you want a financially stable bank that's liquid and well capitalized. So, it's important to do a financial health check, understand the financial risks, and how that could impact you. By looking at a bank's liquidity ratio and solvency ratio, you get a snapshot of the bank's financials and how safe it is in raw financial terms. Number 4, operating risks. To get a sense of operational risk, look at how the bank makes money. Opening an offshore account with a bank that's heavily dependent on high-risk investments, derivatives, or lending to high-risk borrowers isn't a great idea, especially if the country where the bank is located doesn't offer deposit or protection. Number 5, compliance risks. Lastly, when opening and maintaining an offshore account, compliance and onboarding practices matter. Ideally, you want a bank that follows best practice and has international standards, and there's a reason for this. If the bank has abnormally lax compliance and onboarding feels way too easy, this can be a sign of larger internal problems and outdated compliance controls, which may signal account problems for account holders in the future. For instance, later on, this can result in unwarranted account restrictions, burdensome due diligence requests, unpredictable account freezes, sudden account terminations, and more. Additionally, banks with poor compliance standards attract high-risk customers. This, in turn, attracts scrutiny from regulators, authorities, and correspondent banks. And this can result in bank failures, a sudden loss of critical correspondent relationships, and massive de-risking campaigns where entire customer segments suddenly have their accounts closed. Do you feel ready to open an offshore account today? To start opening accounts today, you can obviously use the information that I've shared in these videos. Or you can access one of our account opening services and start taking action today. Each of our premium services are designed to help non-resident individuals, foreigners, and their businesses open international bank accounts. Whether you need personal, private, business, offshore, or even US banking, we have an account opening solution that will work for you. You can get started with GlobalBanks IQ, our international banking intelligence service. It gives you step-by-step instructions and all the tools you need to find and open accounts with top banks around the world. Plus, you'll unlock our international intelligence reports, account opening strategies, international bank database, and much more. We also have a dedicated US account opening service called GlobalBanks USA, which is 100% focused on helping non-residents, foreigners, and even foreign and offshore companies open bank accounts in the US. It involves direct one-on-one support from our international team of experts and includes access to our US banking intelligence reports, US account opening strategies, and US bank database. And, of course, there's our flagship service, GlobalBanks Insider. With GlobalBanks Insider, you'll get access to everything we offer, including all of the benefits in GlobalBanks IQ and GlobalBanks USA, plus our entire library of premium reports, the entire GlobalBanks database, and dedicated one-on-one support from our team of international banking experts to help you find and open the accounts you need. So, no matter where you're looking to bank in the world, you're only a few clicks away from finding and opening international accounts. To get started, just click the link in the description below to learn more about the available options. And before signing off, don't forget to hit subscribe so you get alerted every time we share new banking opportunities. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you next time.